Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of Economy this week, wherein we are going to take all the important economy related articles which have appeared in different newspapers from 3rd to the 9th of September and analyze these particular articles. The first very important article which has caught the headlines in the last couple of days is India overtaking United Kingdom to become the fifth biggest economy in the global market. Now, what are the very important points here? First and foremost, whenever you talk about economy or the size of the economy here, they are simply talking about the value of gross domestic product, the final price of or the market price of all the final goods and services, that is gross domestic product. Now, whenever you talk about GDP here, again there are two very important points. The GDP value can be measured at PPP basis, purchasing power parity, or it can also be measured at nominal exchange rates, NER. What is the rank of India? Whenever you talk about GDP in terms of PPP, India's ranking is the third largest. India is the third largest country in the global market. Whereas in terms of GDP value in nominal exchange rate, until very recently, I repeat, until very recently, India was the sixth largest economy in the global market. Now, with this particular new news, or let's say this latest information, India has overtaken United Kingdom to become the fifth largest economy. It has become the fifth largest economy. Now, in terms of data, which I don't think so is relevant for UPSC, the article simply says India's GDP value as per the latest estimates, it is more than $854 billion, and UK's GDP value, it is $816 billion. And looking at this particular data, we can just make a conclusion here itself. India's GDP value is greater than that of UK's GDP value, and that is the precise reason India has been able to overtake UK. But apart from this, is the GDP number more than sufficient to just come to a conclusion and cheer and be happy regarding Indian economy? Not at all. Please understand this. The value of GDP is one fact. Yes, no doubt we have overtaken the GDP of UK, and if you go by the SBI reports, in the next couple of years, by the end of this particular decade, we'll be overtaking even the Japanese economy as well as Germany's economy. As per the SBI report, if the same thing happens, that is the GDP keeps on growing at the same rate, India's GDP will become the third largest in the global market by end of this decade. But is it just sufficient to have a larger GDP? Is the GDP the end in itself? Absolutely no. Remember this. These kind of questions are asked under the chapter called as inclusive growth, which basically encompasses or talks about the growth as well as the development aspect of the economy. When you compare India's GDP with UK's GDP, you can easily decipher and say that, sir, India's GDP is much greater. But when you talk about per capita income, PCI, per capita income, UK's population is somewhere around 68 million, whereas India's population has crossed more than 1.4 billion. So when you talk about per capita income, UK's per capita income is much higher compared to what is the per capita income of India. That has been pointed out by many people, many experts regarding only looking at this particular issue of the larger GDP or the fifth largest GDP for Indian economy. So this is one point. Second very important point, the article also says that at the end of the first quarter, Q1, at the end of the first quarter, Indian economy experienced a GDP growth rate of 13.5%. In the last week's video of discussion, we have had the discussion on the GDP growth rate. If you have not seen it, I suggest please go to the previous week's video. Please have a look at it. Whereas the UK's GDP has actually shrunk by 0.1%. This is also the reason why we say that UK is experiencing certain issues in the economy, whereas Indian economy is experiencing a recovery phase. It is growing now. And because the population of India is much higher, various experts have pointed out and stated that even if UK wants to defeat India, overtake India, it will not happen very soon. And the size of India's GDP, right, earlier, before 1700, before the onset of, let's say, the Britishers coming into India, right, invading India, etc., the size of India's GDP was much larger than compared to the UK's GDP. But after that, this is one of the very few times where India's GDP has overtaken one of the biggest economies in the global market, and this is the gist of the article provided here. Now, based on this discussion, I've given, right, an MCQ. I'll come back to this picture, don't worry. I've given an MCQ. Consider the following statements. India is the fifth largest economy in terms of GDP at PPP. Do not look at the only number and jump to a conclusion statement is correct. No, this statement is wrong. Why? I'm talking about GDP at purchasing power parity. Statement 1 is wrong, by the way. It has overtaken UK to become the fifth largest, and with this, even its per capita income has become larger than that of UK. Statement 2 is also wrong. Why? Population of UK is very small compared to India's population. Hence, the per capita income of UK is much larger compared to India's per capita income. Both the statements are wrong. Hence, the right option for this question is option D. But apart from that, there was this particular picture. Now, what are the important points that you need to make a note from this picture? First very important point, India is the fifth largest economy, no doubt. But in the global market, if you count the global GDP, the GDP of India accounts for 3.5% of global GDP. Remember this, can be asked in UPSC Prelims. Please remember this. India's GDP value accounts for 3.5% of global GDP numbers. Second very important point, if you take the top 5 countries, the topmost, it is USA, accounts for almost, not exactly, I know that, almost 1/4 of the total GDP value. China accounts for around 1/5, right? Japan accounts for around 4.8%, Germany 4.1%, and India accounts for 3.5%. Now, if you take the top 5 countries in terms of their contribution to GDP or in terms of size of their GDP, you will realize that all the 5 put together account for more than 50% of global share in the GDP. Global GDP share, it is more than 50%. Can be asked in UPSC, please remember it. What about India's growth in terms of GDP rankings? It was declared as the 10th largest back in 2014, 7th largest 2015, 6th largest in 2019, and now 5th largest in 2022. And I just a couple of minutes ago I stated that if you go as per the SBI report, India's size of the GDP will be the 3rd largest by the end of the current decade itself. So these are certain very important points. Make a note of this, revise these particular points. Next important article, Kisan Credit Card, KCC, Kisan Credit Card. Now the idea of Kisan Credit Card was introduced in order to ensure that farmers will be able to get access to credit. Simple. We wanted to ensure that the farmers, cultivators, will get easy access to credit because they generally find it very difficult to get access to institutional loans. And when they borrow from informal sources such as money lenders, the rate of interest is very high. So one, in order to ensure that the farmers will get access to easy credit, we introduced the concept of Kisan Credit Card. Second, the farmer under the Kisan Credit Card scheme was allowed to withdraw money and use it for various other purposes. For example, you require money for marketing purposes. You require for post-harvest expenses. You want to use it and maintain the infrastructure in the field. For household expenditure, you want money. For many particular purposes, government said the farmer can use KCC scheme or Kisan Credit Card scheme. Now, when a farmer wanted to apply and get a Kisan Credit Card, the process is that they are supposed to take the land document, go to the bank, apply for the Kisan Credit Card, And many of the times it has been found that the farmers are asked to come to the bank multiple times. They are supposed to submit the documentation, and in order to get the card, they are asked to come multiple times to the bank. That is one problem which has been cited by Reserve Bank of India. Second, they also use the term called as a turn around time. Turn around time. What do you mean by turn around time? Imagine I am a farmer. I will apply for a Kisan Credit card today. How many days it will take for me to get this particular card? RBI says it is generally around 2 to 4 weeks. I repeat, RBI's estimates say that it is generally around 2 to 4 weeks. So look at the two problems which have been cited by RBI. One, the farmer is asked to come to the bank multiple times. Second, the turnaround time is slightly on a higher side. So what RBI now is saying that we will basically digitize the process of the Kisan Credit card lending. That is, rather than physically coming, applying for the loan, waiting for so many times, etc., so many days, etc., will make the whole process digital, so that one, the farmers do not have to come multiple times to the banks. That would be addressed, and the process would become much more speedier, reducing the turnaround time, getting or ensuring that the farmers are getting access to these particular schemes at a very speedier manner. And as a result of this, the central bank says they'll be implementing these particular schemes to digitalize the process of KCC lending from the month of September in some of the districts of Madhya Pradesh as well as Tamil Nadu. Remember the name of the states. The pilot they are implementing in some of the districts of MP, that is Madhya Pradesh, and TN, that is Tamil Nadu. And for digitalizing the lending practices or activities, they have identified two banks here, Union Bank of India as well as Federal Bank of India. Now they are going to implement first in these districts, identify what are the problems, then expand it amongst these districts, then expand it throughout the India. So by doing all of this, RBI says it will streamline the process, it will make the process digital now, and the farmers don't have to go to the bank multiple times. They can get access to these particular schemes at a very sooner, or let's say at a speedier manner. So this is the gist of the article provided regarding Kisan Credit Card. Now based on this, I have an MCQ. For which of the following purposes the Kisan Credit Card can be used? First one, to meet the short-term credit requirements for cultivation of the crops. Of course, yes, statement is correct. Second, post-harvest expenses. Yes, for this also under KCC you can use it. Consumption requirement of the farmer household. Yes, this is also allowed. And finally, investment credit requirement for agriculture and allied activities. Yes, this is also allowed. In fact, I forgot to add one more point here. Please remember this. Kisan Credit Card is not just available to farmer, it is even available to tenant farmers, sharecroppers. It is available to even the self-help groups, etc. So all the 4 points are correct. Right option for the question is option D, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Let me go to the next article. Management of government expenditure. Government of India recently has introduced a new system where the releasing of the funds are connected to usage of the funds. Sir, what do you mean by this? What is the advantage? Let me give a very simple example. Imagine here is the government. Government of India has allocated, let's say, 1,000 crore rupees for a particular authority. It has allocated the 1,000 crore rupees to an authority for implementing a scheme. The scheme could be a central sector scheme, centrally sponsored scheme, etc. The issue here is the 1,000 crore rupees when they are released to the authority. Understand the logic here. Imagine the authority is going to implement the scheme maybe in the 4th quarter of the current financial year. In the 4th quarter, does it make sense for the government to simply keep the 1,000 crore rupees with this particular authority? Does it make any sense? Sir, it should make sense. Some of you will simply say, sir, no problem here. The authority is going to spend 1,000 crores. So the government is allocating 1,000 crore which is lying with the authority. What is the problem? The problem is we are in the second quarter. We are in the second quarter and I said the authority will implement the scheme in the fourth quarter. That is after 3 months, after 6 months from today. Now if you simply allocate the 1,000 crore rupees, it is lying with authority. On the other hand, Government of India, which wants to spend money in other areas, now has found that they do not have sufficient money. They will borrow money from the market and start paying interest on it. I hope you understand this. The concept is simple. Government of India says, I allocate the funds. You right now do not have any usage of it. You will simply keep the funds with you. But because you are keeping funds, it simply means this money is not available with me right now. And if I want to have money, now I am forced to borrow from the market, also pay interest. Rather than this, what if the government changes the policy, wherein government simply says, you need 1,000 crore in the fourth quarter. I will allocate 1,000 crore in the fourth quarter directly. Till then, I can use the 1,000 crore rupees for some other objectives. Now, some of you will find a problem with this and say, sir, anyways, you will have to give 1,000 crore to the authority in the fourth quarter. If you have already utilized it, from where will you get the money from? My argument is, rather than allocating today itself, I will use the money for something else. I will not borrow today. I will borrow money from the market, let's say in the fourth quarter. What is the use? Many of you will simply say, what is the use? Anyways, you are going to borrow. But please understand, rather than borrowing today, what if I borrow after 4 months? I borrow after 6 months. Will I not be saving that interest component? That is the argument here. Central government says this has already been implemented for various initiatives. For example, central sector schemes, centrally sponsored scheme, we are covering it. We will expand it. We will cover now central sector schemes, centrally sponsored scheme, and even any allocation of funds for the authorities will be covered. And now we will link the usage of the funds or release of the funds with the usage. You want to use the funds, you have the requirement of spending money. Now the funds would be transferred. Now the funds would be transferred rather than the earlier system, where the funds would simply be transferred irrespective of whether the organizations or authorities or the agencies require the funds right now or not, thereby making lot of savings, financial savings for the government of India. So this new system has been introduced by the government. Please be very careful. Sir, what is the use of this? What is the use of this? UPSC, for example, they will ask you a question on the concept of managing public finance expenditure. Managing public finance expenditure. And the question simply says, how do you improve the quality of public expenditure? This is one example there. I understand this is one primary example using a tool. Government has implemented Central Nodal Agency, CNA. Government of India has implemented SNA, Single Nodal Agency. CNA has been implemented for central sector schemes. SNA has been implemented for centrally sponsored schemes. Then there is a Treasury Single Account TSA for these kind of authorities. And by implementing all of this, government now says, whenever the funds are required for expenditure, funds would be released. That is the whole objective of new type of a scheme implemented by the government to manage the expenditures. This is the gist of the article. Next article is regarding sovereign green bond. What is this idea of a sovereign green bond? Let me explain. First, let's start with the green bond here. Again, it's not a very novel concept. Green bond as a concept has been there in the discussion for many years in India. Especially because Government of India is now focused on promotion of renewable energy, green energy, protection of environment, sustainable development, etc. The idea of a green financing becomes very important. In case of India itself, there have been many companies, many banks or many institutions which have already issued green bonds. But to be very precise, there is no definition given by the government of India as to for what purposes green bonds can be utilized. I repeat, generally what we say is a green bond is a debt instrument wherein the issuer borrows the money, uses the money for specific purposes. I hope you understand this. The issuer, the one who is issuing the bond, will collect the money, use the money for specific purposes. What kind of specific purposes? The issuer will use the money to finance green projects such as wind energy projects, solar energy projects, low emission transportation, etc. like this. These are called as green infrastructure projects. But as government of India has have they provided any definition as to what is a green infrastructure project which can be used, right, or which can be developed using the funds from the green bond? The answer is no, by the way. We simply take the international practice, implement in India. That's the first point. Second very important point is, Government of India in the budget announced that they want to issue green bonds. And because these are issued by the government directly, I repeat, because these are going to be issued by government directly, these are called as sovereign green bond. And some of the very important points given in the article are: 1. In the second half of the current financial year, H2 stands for second half of the current financial year, government is thinking of issuing 25,000 crore worth of sovereign green bonds. I am writing SGB, do not be confused here. SGB generally is used for sovereign gold bonds. But now here I am going to use this short form to represent sovereign green bond. So in the second half of the current financial year, there is an estimated issuance of 25,000 crore rupees worth of sovereign green bond. Second, along with this, it is expected that Government of India will also define what kind of projects, what kind of infrastructure projects will be categorized which can be financed using the sovereign green bond. Because already I have told you, there is no definition given by the government, there is just an international convention. Third very important point, as of now these particular bonds which will be issued only for domestic investors. These will be issued only for domestic investors. There is no plan as of now to issue these for foreign investors. And the fourth very important point, Government of India has stated that they are considering providing tax incentives for the investors who will be purchasing or investing in the sovereign green bond. I hope you understand this. Government is considering providing tax incentives. What is the objective here? If the government provides a tax incentive such as, let's say, a lower tax rate or exemption of this investment, etc., it will be helpful in attracting a lot of investment into the sovereign green bond. So these are the four very, very important points which have been provided in the article on sovereign green bond, which are proposed to be issued for the first time ever by the Government of India. Let me go to the next very important article, nano urea. The next important article is on concept of nano urea. Now, as far as I am concerned, this article is a very good article, not because they are criticizing the government, but because whatever information you require about nano urea, all of the information is present in the article itself. Now, what is the important information you need to understand? Let's go one by one. First, there are multiple types of fertilizers in India, but again and again we have been discussing this. Urea is the highest consumed fertilizer in India. And because we produce urea and this production is not sufficient, we import a lot of urea into India. The import bill of urea is also very, very high. If you go as per the article, it says that annually Government of India spends somewhere around 40,000 crore rupees. That is, when I say Government of India, overall economy spends around 40,000 crore rupees, right, basically to import urea. Now apart from this, Government of India also provides a subsidy for urea. That's a fact. Remember this. Third very important point, IFFCO, it's a cooperative. IFFCO has developed a product by the name of Nano urea. Either they can use the term Nano urea or else it is nothing but liquid urea. Now many of you are confused as to what is a liquid urea. The urea fertilizer is present in a liquid form, because generally when you see urea, it is in a form of pellets, solid form. Rather than solid urea, now we have developed, a cooperative in India has developed, right, a liquid urea, a nano urea. Why it is called as a nano urea? Nanotechnology or nanoparticles are there, hence called as nano urea. Simple. What is the advantage of using a nano urea or liquid urea? As per the claims of the government, if you use just one bottle of half a liter, you can simply replace this with one bag of urea. Rather than using one bag of 45 kgs of urea, you can simply replace this with one half a liter bottle of nano urea or liquid urea. This is the advantage the government says this will provide, and Government of India has been promoting the development or production of nano urea, and by 2025, government says will become self-sufficient. That is, whatever is the requirement of urea, you will be able to produce in the domestic market, hence the imports would be addressed. These are certain important points. Now what apart from this is important, relevant, which is given in the article here. Whenever these kind of products are supposed to be implemented or supposed to be available for commercial usage, there is one authority, Indian Council for Agriculture Research, ICAR, Indian Council for Agriculture Research. ICAR will conduct the test for 3 seasons or 3 rounds of test is conducted for such products, then the approval is provided, then this is introduced for commercial usage. But in the context of nano urea, what has been done? Government of India has cut this short to 2 tests. Rather than 3 seasons or 3 rounds, it has been cut short only to 2 rounds or 2 seasons like this. Many of the experts have raised concern over this particular reduction and speedier process of giving approvals for nano urea. That's the first point. Second very important point which has been raised as a cause of concern is, many of the experts still do not know. They do not know whether this urea is going to completely reduce the dependence on solid urea. I hope you understand this. Government says if you use half a liter bottle, of this, you don't have to use the physical, or let's say solid urea, pelleted urea. But many experts point out that urea generally for a cultivation of crops such as let's say wheat and rice, 2 bags of urea is used. That is, whenever the plant is in sapling stage, that is in a very small growth stage, without leaves, right, 1 bag of urea is necessary. And when the plant grows, leaves are present, another bag of urea is applicable. As per various experts, nano urea can simply replace the urea which is applied at later stages, not at developmental, that is basal stage. When the plants will have leaves, rather than applying the physical, that is a solid urea, right, that is a granules of the urea, you can shift that, you can substitute that with nano urea. But what if it is a sapling, a plant without any leaves? Now the basal application is required. You cannot use the liquid urea, and now you will have to use the pelleted or the granule urea itself. So right now the concern, another concern which has been raised is, even now we do not know whether the introduction of nano urea will move the farmers away from the solid urea as such. So these are some of the very important points which have been mentioned in the article regarding nano urea. Now let me go to the next article. RBI crackdown on cooperative banks has gathered pace, has increased. What do you mean by RBI crackdown here? Simple. RBI has identified a certain erring or those particular cooperative banks which are not operating correctly as per the guidelines and has kept on imposing penalties, fines on the cooperative banks. Now many of you will simply say, sir, but cooperative banks, I read somewhere, these will come under NABARD, etc., etc. What are you talking of? Before 2020, there was this concern of dual regulation, duality of control over the cooperative banks. Why? Cooperatives generally are established under the state government. If it is a single state cooperative, state government has register of cooperatives and these cooperatives will get registered under the state government. But because they conduct certain banking activities, they will also come under the regulation of Reserve Bank of India. But to what extent RBI can regulate the cooperatives, there was a very, very limited scope. But after the debacle of Punjab Maharashtra Cooperative Bank, Government of India amended Banking Regulation Act. Government of India amended Banking Regulation Act. And with the amendment of Banking Regulation Act in 2020, RBI was given huge range of powers or wide array of powers to regulate the cooperative banks. This regulation is applicable to district central cooperative banks. It is applicable to urban cooperative bank, multi-state, single state, doesn't matter. So the regulation is applicable. More powers have been given to Reserve Bank of India in a nutshell with this amendment act. Now as a result of these particular powers, Reserve Bank of India has identified many of these particular cooperative banks which are not operating as per the provisions, which are not operating as per the guidelines of RBI. So what do you mean by guidelines of RBI here? Imagine you are a bank and in the bank you have given loans. Obviously if you are a bank you will have to give loans. Now don't say, sir, what if it's a payment bank? It is a special type of a bank. It's an exception, not a norm. You talk about RRBs, you talk about cooperative banks, scheduled commercial bank, public sector bank, private sector bank, all of them involved in lending. So when you give loans, obviously if the loans are not returned, RBI has certain conditions or guidelines regarding reporting of these measures. Right? Provisioning has to be done, classification has to be done, etc. And if you do not follow it, you are very relaxed, you do not follow this correctly, then what can happen is the banks might end up earning or incurring a huge amount of a loss. And one more very important point you need to make a note of this is, a cooperative bank is not like a normal scheduled commercial bank. A normal scheduled commercial bank such as, let's say, a public sector bank. Why? In the context of public sector bank, the heads of the banks are experts who are appointed by the government by taking the recommendations of a committee, FSIB now. Whereas in case of cooperative banks, there is a lot of political interference. Elections are conducted. Register of cooperatives will oversee some of the functions of the cooperative banks. That becomes a problem. Right? Political interference with relaxed approach, laxity in terms of the guidelines might become a deadly combination which might lead to the banks suffering losses, which is nothing but the losses of the deposits of the customers. So Reserve Bank of India, it has imposed fines on 100 cooperative banks so far in 2022. It was 124 banks in 2021 and 22 banks in 2020. RBI says we are going to tighten our regulations, improve our regulations on the cooperative banks so that we are going to protect the interest of the depositors. So that is the gist of the article. Let me go to the next article. Financial inclusion. Now before I go forward, this is not the first time that I am having a discussion or talking about the idea of financial inclusion. If you have been basically looking or let's say studying the articles that we discuss in the weekly videos, you will realize that some time ago I discussed the idea of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, which has completed 8 years, and the connection to financial inclusion. Now going forward, taking the argument forward, very recently there has been one more very important point of discussion regarding the number of branches which will promote financial inclusion in India. Now, first and foremost, in India, there are more than 6 lakh villages. That's a fact, by the way. In India, there are more than 6 lakh villages. And many of them do not have a banking branch. Physical means a brick and mortar banking branch. And if you ask me why, sir, why are we not opening the banking branches throughout India? Answer is very simple. For banks, it doesn't make any sense to open a banking branch in all the villages in India. Doesn't work out for them. Why? The cost of operations would be much higher compared to the revenues that they can generate from such branches. And that is the precise reason. One, there has been an issue regarding coverage of the villages. Second, what about the people who are living in the villages? They will have to travel more than 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers to get access to their bank account. And Government of India is saying, now we are going to use the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts for providing many benefits to the people, such as LPG subsidies, scholarships, PM Kisan, the incentives, etc. So don't you think non-availability of the branches will limit the implementation of such schemes? In order to address this, Prime Minister has asked the banks to open up branches in such a way that for every village, understand this, for every village which has a population of 3,000 people, at least 3,000 people, in a vicinity of 5 kilometers, in a radius of 5 kilometers, there is one bank branch. And in order to achieve that, the public sector banks as well as the private sector banks, both public sector banks as well as private sector banks, have announced that they'll be opening 363 branches and 47 branches respectively. If you understand this, 363 bank branches will be opened by PSBs, and the private sector bank will be opening up 47 bank branches to cover such villages, thereby ensuring that within a short distance of 5 kilometers, a bank branch is available and the people living in the villages will be able to get access to the services promoting financial inclusion in India. Apart from this, there is one more term which has been introduced. Important, remember this. They have mentioned a scheme by the name of Lead Bank Scheme. LBS. Lead Bank Scheme. The Lead Bank Scheme was introduced many decades ago, back in 1969. And the objective of the Lead Bank Scheme was, imagine there is a district, because understand this is an area approach. District is the coverage here. District is a point of coverage. Within the district, there are multiple banks. Now, one bank will be appointed as a lead bank. I repeat, one bank will be appointed as a lead bank, and the lead bank will have to ensure that efficiently the customers are covered, efficiently the loans are issued, consortium lending is taken care of, etc. like this. So that is the objective of Lead Bank Scheme, that also has been mentioned in the article here. So these are certain very important points which have been provided in order to promote financial inclusion. The last article for the day, the panel on cooperation policy. In fact, there are two important points. The whole article is not important, just two important points. And both of the points are not present in the article because the events took place on two different dates. First, this is a very much factual information here. Government of India has set up a 47-member committee. I repeat, Government of India has set up a 47-member committee which will basically be headed by Mr. Suresh Prabhu. And this committee will provide national cooperation policy to promote cooperatives. Simple. Earlier, back in the year 2002, we had such a policy to promote cooperatives. It's almost 20 years now. We want to have a new policy to promote cooperatives, right, through economic development, etc. So we have set up a committee headed by Mr. Suresh Prabhu to do exactly the same thing. That's the first very important point. Second very important point, in one of the conferences on cooperatives, Mr. Amit Shah, who is the Minister for Cooperation, has announced that Government of India will be opening multi-state cooperatives. multi-state cooperatives, not a cooperative which functions under a single state, multi-state cooperatives. And these two multi-state cooperatives will be one in the seed sector and the second one will be in the export sector. So these are the two factual points of information which have appeared in the last 1 week regarding cooperatives that you need to understand and remember. So these are the various articles as well as the questions related to the articles which have appeared in various newspapers from 3rd to 9th of September 2022. If you like our initiative, hit the like button, provide your valuable comments in the section below. And if you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do now. Thank you. Have a great day.